this product is that distress paint is basically the first medium that we've had with distress that's going to have the opacity but also the reactive qualities of distress. So back in all of our earlier products, distress ink pads, distress markers, distress stain, those are all translucent. So when we're doing our backgrounds and we're layering, we're seeing color through color. Now with the introduction of paint, these are opaque. But these have some very different properties than regular acrylic paints because obviously we make Adirondack dabbers, we have studio paints, so we have a lot of different kind of paints, but this one is all its own. So first thing we're going to notice is the viscosity. Each of these paints have a mixing ball in there that you have to shake up to mix that around because it's very, very fluid. It's an incredibly fluid acrylic paint. So we always want to shake that up, get that mixing ball kind of rattling around. Next, you're going to notice the tops of these. Now, if you work with several of these paints, and the more you work with them, you're going to see that the tops of these dabbers always stay domed like that. And this is the same dabber top as Adirondack, right? But that's because this paint doesn't have any filler in there. So even if I get paint in the top of that, you can see as I fill it with paint, you'll see it just starts to pop and just kind of clears right out. So it won't actually pack up in the dabber because the viscosity is so fluid of this paint. When I go to put it onto a surface, I can apply this paint right onto my surface. Now, if I want to just dab it out, I can dab out my paint. I can blend with this, but of course when we're blending with this, we're going to see those lines in the paint. If we use the dabber itself, that's going to show all these lines. What I'm going to do to blend it out is just take my hand, and while this is wet, I'm just going to wipe over the top. And that's going to soften it almost like a chalk or a pigment. But again, it's still paint. If you don't want to use your hand because you think, oh, I don't want to get paint on my hand, you can go in with blending tool, cut and dry, something like that. And we can still go in with paint. We can dab that down and say, oh, you know what? I need to blend with this. I want to move it around because I don't want to touch it. But here's the cool thing. If you are a hands-on crafter, you don't have to worry about this paint staining because even though this paint is dry, it's going to wipe off with a baby wipe or just a damp cloth. So this doesn't stain your hands the way inks do because remember, it's just an opaque acrylic paint. So just a baby wipe and it's going to come right off, even after it's dry. Very, very interesting. So, once it's on the surface, and I'm not worried about capping these up because I've already tested them for about a month in Arizona, just left them open, just to see like what's going to happen. And the top of it got a little dry, but I just pushed down and the wet paint came right back, so it wasn't that bad. Yeah, because I mean the paint's still going to dry.
Much less in Arizona.
That's right. I had to test it there. So when we're working with this, drying time of this, obviously the thinner the paint, the faster it's going to dry. The thicker the paint, got a much longer open time, you know, maybe 5 to 7 minutes. But on this, it'd probably take a couple of minutes to dry or just a quick zap with a heat tool. And I wish you had like feel-o-vision. So I'm going to pass this around. When you feel over this, you will not know where the paper is and the paint is. You do not feel the paint at all. It has no texture to it. Because it doesn't have those fillers in it, you don't have to worry about all that heavy texture in your paint. It's just going to go on. We often refer to it like an inky paint. It is. Because it's like, is it ink, is it paint? But it really is an acrylic paint. When you put it over something, I mean, it has those different levels of opacity. So if I was going to put it onto a surface, let's say I had a printed surface, and this I'm just showing you is just tissue tape. But if you weren't going to use tissue tape, if it was going to be scrapbook paper, or maybe an old book page, or a collage that you already had some imagery on, if we go in, let's take, I'll go in with that same color just to show you. Oh, thanks. If I dab this on, I'm going to get opaque paint because that's what it is. And that's what we have to remember. This stuff is paint, okay? But while it's wet, if I go in and start blending this out, it's still going to be opaque. But if I keep working it in the areas, I can get it to actually be more translucent. So I can have words appear, kind of disappear, and it's like finger painting for adults.
You can even do masking in that certain phrase that you want down there and do the dark line outside.
Yeah, and you can swipe right over the top. So here I'm just going to dry this. And you don't have to heat dry this paint. I'm just doing it simply for speed. So don't ever think, oh, you got to heat set it for it to do it. No, you don't at all. I'm just in a rush just to show you because I love the fact that when this paint dries, it has that wonderful matte finish. It doesn't have any shine or gloss to it. So I'm just going to let that air dry for a minute. Yeah, it doesn't have a plastic feel, and it doesn't have that gritty feel either. That's what I think is so cool. So here's where we really kick it up into distress. Because so far you're like, all right, so you put paint on, you blended it, all right. You put it on, you smudge it with your finger, okay, great. So here's where it really gets good with distress. This is going to be a paint that is completely reactive with water. That's what distress does. When distress gets wet, it wants to go crazy. It wants to wick out. And this paint is no different. So if we put paint onto a surface and we get it wet, our color is going to wick. The more water you add, the more it's going to wick. The more water you add, the more it's going to wick. So just by adding water, this paint actually wants to get out of the way. And so when you do this, the more water you put onto this, you'll see the more that paint will start to move. And even though this kind of looks cloudy, like you think, oh, it's going to dry with kind of a white film, it will not. You'll see. I'm going to actually let this one air dry while I work on showing you how to marbleize some colors. So, distress paint. So what I'm going to do on this is I'm actually going to work on the craft sheet. So let me just kind of clean this up. And I'm just going to take some colors. We'll actually go with some bright colors. Why not? Because these come in 24 of the 48 distress colors. And because of the fact that we have some of those new colors from our seasonal that are now part of the permanent line, we have some bright colors thrown in. You know, some of the summer ones, picked raspberry, mowed lawn, salty ocean. Yeah, a lot of those. But we also have, you know, my good comfort ones, walnut stain, black soot, gray burlap. So when I put this on, I can go in and spritz this with water just to kind of get that paint little reaction time. But now when I go through this, my paints are actually going to marbleize. So these acrylics will act, and you can see them even on the surface. When you swipe through them, they actually stay together. They don't migrate and turn to mud. And if you get them wet, they're going to react. And the more water you add, the more you're going to get that color to kind of blend and migrate. And so I'm going to dry this. Again, we can let this air dry, but in this case, I'm going to use a heat tool. I love the colors. I love how vivid they are. I love the ability that I can get opaque coverage, or I can get translucent just from using my fingers. But what's really interesting is that when you put it onto a surface, you don't have to worry about that surface kind of having any grit to it. So like when you're accenting things like metals, and I'll show you, because this works on metal, plastic, glass, acrylic, fabric, wood, any of those. It's going to be permanent.
So this is easier to write with the white pens. You know, trying to write over acrylic paint is almost impossible.
Correct, because this has, I mean, it has no hand. When you feel it, like you don't even know that there's paint on there. So this would even allow you to create a background and maybe stamp with it and color with distress markers, right? So if you were working, maybe you were working on craft paper, or maybe you're working on a canvas, or you wanted an area, and I love how it just all stays, all those colors. Like all that paint that we swapped through, you thought, that's just gonna be
Rainbow
brown.
candy.
Yeah, it's all there. It's like a bag of Skittles. All right, we'll just get that. So I just wanna have this finished drawing. So a lot of times I'll go in with a cloth just to kind of pat off any of that excess. Because I wanna show you another great thing that I like about these paints, is that even though they have all that great kind of reactive play time when it comes to working with water, and you get some really, really great effects, some really great drips, some really great splatters. Like I know you love splatters, so the fact that these are already, I mean, the viscosity of this is so fluid, but if you wet that and you like hit it, I mean, you would get an amazing paint splat. Yeah, you, oh, okay, stand clear. Yeah, stand clear. Yeah, so if you do that, yeah, you get great splats.
I'm so happy.
Yeah, yeah, because it's really, really fluid. So that's going to be great on different projects. I know. Everyone's going to go in. They're going to go in with a big trash bag on, and yeah, goggles, and yeah. I did that range for you once. Yeah, once. All right. So once the paint is dry, here's a great thing. When I go to wet it, the paint does not re-wet. So once it's dry, and that's going to allow me to go on with any other layers I want. So if you wanted to go over with distress ink, you want to go over the layer of stain, none of that is going to re-wet. And that's one of the really big benefits to working with a paint and now having an opaque medium, because if I did a colorful background, and let's say I use the distress stain for this, and I use picked raspberry and salty ocean, and I made something, it's not going to have this matte finish, it's obviously going to be translucent. But if I wanted to go over it and ink it further, my color is obviously going to get dirty. And you could get to a point that if you put too much color on top, you've made mud. Whereas here we can go in with our distress ink pads. We can add additional colors, so maybe we want to throw in, or let's take maybe a little teacup. I think I saw that over here somewhere. There we go. That's always a fun one. We'll even throw in a little brown, because we've got to make it safe for me. Let's not get crazy here. All right. So here I can go with my distress ink. If I want to blend some of this, I want to add some of that, throw in the colors there. Maybe I'll even use the same ink tool. I'll throw in like a little wild honey just to warm up some areas, and maybe I want to throw in some vintage fur because I like that color too. I'm just going to add some, right? So if I wanted to tone some of that down in areas, the beauty of this is that this is still distress ink. This is always going to react with water. This stuff will never be permanent. So even though my paint isn't going to go anywhere, I can now add water, I can do splatters on top of it, and this is going to do all of its dripping and running, but it's never going to affect the paint underneath. So that's going to reveal how much color you want to appear through, or how much of that distress you want over the top.